I used to manage a small retail store in a quiet suburban town, but that wasn't my only gig. To make ends meet, I took up part-time jobs here and there, and one of those was working at a 24-hour supermarket just a few towns over. It wasn't glamorous, but it was easy, mindless work, stocking shelves, assisting late-night shoppers, and occasionally cleaning up the aisles when there was a spill. The supermarket was a standard big chain, nothing particularly memorable about it, except for the fact that on some nights it didn't feel right. I used to joke with my coworkers about how the store felt like a maze, with aisles shifting and stretching further than they should. It was just a silly joke, something to pass the time. But after what happened one night, I've never set foot in that store again. It was a quiet Tuesday, and I had the night shift. It wasn't unusual for the store to be empty during those late hours. Around 2 a.m., there would be maybe 1 or 2 customers at most, usually in and out, grabbing whatever they needed and leaving without a word. I was alone that night, save for the security guard who sat lazily near the front of the store. My job was to restock aisle 12, which was where we kept cleaning supplies and paper goods. As I started stocking shelves, I heard the faint squeak of a shopping cart further down the aisle. No big deal. Someone had come in to do some late-night shopping. After a few minutes, I realized the sound of the cart had stopped, but I hadn't heard anyone walk by or leave the aisle. I stood up from where I'd been crouching, scanning the aisle. It was empty. I didn't think much of it, though the store felt unnaturally quiet after that. Shrugging it off, I went back to work, moving down the aisle toward the back to grab more boxes from the storeroom. But the more I walked, the longer the aisle seemed to stretch. I'd stocked the store dozens of times, and I knew it inside and out. This aisle wasn't supposed to be this long. The shelves extended further than they should have, and it felt like I wasn't making any progress. I stopped, confused, and looked around. The lights overhead seemed dimmer than usual, and the shelves on either side were almost empty, though I could have sworn they were fully stocked just minutes ago. I turned around, intending to head back to the front of the store, but when I did, the entrance was gone. Where I should have seen the front checkout counters, there was nothing but more aisles. Endless rows of shelves, all stretching into the darkness. Panic set in. I tried walking faster, my shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor as I hurried down what I thought was the right path. But no matter how far I walked, I never reached the front of the store. The aisles were repeating, their contents becoming stranger the further I went. Items were out of place, canned goods next to cleaning supplies, meat products stored on shelves instead of in the refrigerated section. The sound of that shopping cart echoed again, and this time it was louder, closer. I turned my head, expecting to see the security guard or maybe the customer I had heard earlier. But there was no one there, just an empty cart, sitting motionless in the middle of the aisle.
He started running.
Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I had to get out of there. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound bouncing off the shelves like I was in a cavernous, hollow space. The shelves seemed to stretch higher the further I went, their tops disappearing into the shadows above. And then I saw it, movement at the end of the aisle, a figure standing perfectly still, barely visible in the dim light. I froze, staring at it. It wasn't human. It was tall, much taller than any person, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch and twist in unnatural ways. The figure started to move toward me, slow but deliberate. Its long limbs scraped against the shelves, knocking over boxes and cans as it crept closer. I was paralyzed with fear, my legs refusing to move as I watched it close the distance. Finally, I broke free from the terror that gripped me and bolted down the aisle, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I turned down another aisle, hoping to lose it, but the layout of the store had changed. The aisles twisted and turned in impossible ways, looping back on themselves like a labyrinth. I could still hear it behind me, the scraping sound of its limbs growing louder. Desperate, I sprinted toward what I hoped was an exit. My heart pounded in my chest as I rounded a corner, and then I saw it. The front of the store, bathed in the familiar fluorescent light, the automatic doors standing wide open. Without hesitation, I ran through the doors, collapsing onto the cold pavement outside. The fresh air hit my lungs, and I gasped for breath, my heart racing. I glanced back at the store, expecting to see the figure looming in the doorway, but there was nothing. Just the empty supermarket, as normal as it had ever been. I quit that job the next day. Whatever I saw in those aisles wasn't something I ever wanted to experience again. The store's layout returned to normal by the time the morning shift arrived, but I knew what I'd seen, and I knew I was lucky to have made it out alive. I used to work night shifts at a call center. The job wasn't great, but the nights were quieter, and I could focus without distractions. One of my rituals after every shift was to stop by a 24-hour supermarket on my way home. It was convenient. No lines, barely anyone around, and I could grab whatever I needed in peace. The store itself wasn't anything special, just your typical grocery chain with bright lights, endless aisles, and background music that looped over and over again. But at night, it had a strange atmosphere. The place felt too quiet, too empty, like the shelves themselves were watching you as you moved through the aisles. It was always cold, too, even outside of the frozen section. I never thought much of it, though. It was just part of the routine. That is, until the night when everything changed. It was just after 2 a.m., and the store was as empty as usual. I grabbed a basket and started my usual route: milk, eggs, bread, the essentials. As I made my way down aisle 6, the cereal aisle, I heard something, a faint rustling sound. I stopped, glancing around, but there was no one in sight. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the air conditioning or some item that had shifted on the shelf. But as I moved further down the aisle, the rustling came again, louder this time. It sounded like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I turned my head quickly, and that's when I saw him. At the far end of the aisle, there was a man, tall, wearing an old, dirty coat, and standing completely still. His back was turned to me, but I could see that he was holding something in his hands. I couldn't make out what it was, and honestly, I didn't care. The sight of him, standing there, motionless, in the middle of an empty aisle, was unnerving. I thought maybe he was an employee restocking shelves, but there was something off about him. His posture was too rigid, like he didn't belong there. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should turn back. But then the man started to move, slowly, deliberately, toward the end of the aisle. A cold chill ran down my spine, and I quickly grabbed the items I needed before heading to the front of the store. I didn't want to stay in that aisle any longer. As I approached the checkout lanes, I noticed something strange. The cash registers were all unattended. There was usually a cashier or two working the graveyard shift, but tonight, there was no one around. I called out, but my voice echoed through the empty store with no response. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The supermarket was eerily silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerators. I was about to leave my basket and walk out when, without warning, the lights flickered and went out. The store was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the emergency exit signs. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen in place, listening to the deafening silence. And then I heard it again, that dragging sound. This time, it was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, my hands gripping the handle of the basket tightly. Through the dim light, I saw him again, the man in the coat. He was standing at the end of the frozen food aisle, staring at me with cold, lifeless eyes. My breath caught in my throat as I realized he wasn't holding an item from the shelf. In his hands was a large butcher's knife, the blade glinting faintly in the low light. Panic surged through me. I dropped the basket and bolted toward the exit, my footsteps echoing through the empty aisles. I didn't dare look back. All I could think about was getting out of that store. The automatic doors didn't open fast enough. I slammed into them, frantically waving my arms until they slid open just enough for me to squeeze through. Once I was outside, I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys as I tried to unlock the door. I jumped inside, locking the doors as soon as I got in. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me a few tries to start the engine. I floored the gas and sped out of the parking lot, not daring to look in my rearview mirror. I never went back to that supermarket again. A few weeks later, I heard a news report about a series of strange incidents at that very store. Night shift workers had reported seeing a figure wandering the aisles after hours, someone who didn't belong. Some claimed it was a vagrant. Others said it was something worse. Whatever it was, I don't want to know. All I know is that I was lucky to get out of there alive. I've worked in retail for most of my life, and it's not exactly glamorous, but it pays the bills. A few years ago, I got a job as an overnight stocker at a supermarket. It was quiet, paid well, and I liked the stillness of working alone at night. The store had this eerie calmness about it after midnight, with only a handful of workers on duty. There was something oddly peaceful about being there when the rest of the world was asleep. That being said, I wasn't oblivious to the strange rumors that circulated among the staff. Some of the other overnight workers talked about odd things happening in the store. Flickering lights, cold spots, and aisles that felt longer than they should be. A few of them even claimed they heard voices late at night, but I didn't pay much attention to the gossip. I assumed it was just a way for people to pass the time on long shifts. I never really believed in any of that stuff. But then, one night, I found myself in the middle of something I still can't explain. It was around 3 a.m. on a Thursday. The store was completely empty, as usual, and I was working in the back corner near the pet food section. I was mindlessly stocking shelves, thinking about what I'd do when my shift ended, when I heard it, a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was the air conditioning kicking in or the sound of one of my coworkers talking. I looked around but didn't see anyone nearby. The store was completely still. Shrugging it off, I went back to my work, but after a few minutes, the whispering started again. This time it was clearer. It wasn't just random noise. It was words. Faint, indistinct, but definitely words. My skin prickled as I strained to listen, trying to make out what the voice was saying. It sounded like it was coming from just a few feet away, but when I turned to look, there was no one there. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing down the empty aisle. There was no response, just silence. I was starting to feel a little uneasy, but I brushed it off and continued stocking shelves. I convinced myself that I was just tired, that maybe I'd imagined it. After all, I'd been working late nights for weeks on end. My mind was probably playing tricks on me. But as the night wore on, the whispering didn't stop. Around 4 a.m., I moved to aisle 5, the snack section. That's when things started getting weirder. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just faint murmurs anymore. It was as if someone was standing right behind me, speaking directly into my ear. I spun around, expecting to see one of my coworkers. But again, the aisle was completely empty. My heart was starting to race now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to focus on my work, telling myself that it was just my imagination. But the whispers kept coming, more frequent and more frantic. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was unmistakable. Something was wrong. The air around me felt heavy, like the store itself was closing in on me. I grabbed my cart and started walking toward the front of the store, hoping to find one of the other stockers. But as I moved through the aisles, I realized something unsettling. The layout of the store had changed. I'd worked this shift for months. I knew the aisles like the back of my hand. But now, the shelves seemed taller, the aisles longer, and the familiar layout had twisted into something unrecognizable. I should have been near the checkout counters, but no matter how far I walked, they didn't appear. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened. The whispering had grown louder, almost a chorus now, voices blending together in a soft, eerie hum. And then I heard it, my name. Someone was calling my name, over and over again, in a voice that wasn't familiar but somehow felt personal, like it knew me. I turned in circles, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from, but there was no one there. Panic set in. I dropped the box I was holding and bolted toward the front of the store, determined to find the exit. I didn't care about the whispering anymore. I just wanted out. But the aisles stretched on endlessly, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. I ran, turning corners at random, trying to escape the maze the store had become. The whispering followed me, growing louder and louder until it was deafening. My name was being repeated over and over, like a taunt, a warning, or maybe both. And then, out of nowhere, the lights flickered. For a moment, everything was plunged into darkness, and I could feel the weight of the whispers pressing in on me. My breath caught in my throat, and my body went cold. But just as quickly, the lights came back on, and the store was silent again. I was standing at the front of the supermarket, just a few feet from the exit. The aisles were back to normal, the shelves neatly stocked, the layout exactly as it should be. Shaking, I stumbled toward the door and pushed it open. The cool night air hit me, and I collapsed onto the sidewalk outside, gasping for breath. I could still feel the whispers lingering in the back of my mind, like an echo that wouldn't quite fade. I never went back to that store after that night. I told my manager I quit the next day and never explained why. I don't know what I experienced in those aisles, but whatever it was, I wasn't going to risk encountering it again. The others, they still work there, and from what I've heard, the whispering hasn't stopped.